Hi everyone. So now you probably have your research problem in mind. Maybe you're just not sure how you're supposed to manipulate your variables in order to get the results that you want. So for this chapter, let's look at the different experimental research designs. But for starters, let's remember that when we talk about experimental research, there are three main features, and these are manipulation, comparison, and randomization. Take note, however, that in some cases, there are experimental research designs that do not have all three, and we'll take a look at them further. But now, let's focus on the first feature, which is manipulation. So, when we say we manipulate in experimental research, we mean being able to control the presence or absence and the value of the variable under study. So, the variable under study is called your independent variable. So, usually we call this, okay, so the level or the levels of our IV. Sometimes these are also called conditions, right? So, in a study, for instance, level 1 or condition 1, level 1 could mean the absence of your IV. And then level 2 may mean the presence of your IV. However, in some cases, especially when you want to see how much time is needed for something to develop, you may have more than just two levels. So, in some cases, it's not just the presence or the absence of the IV. So, level 2 could mean 5 minutes if you're talking about time as your IV. And then you may want to add a level 3, which would, let's write something like 10 minutes IV. And then sometimes you can even have level 4, which is 15 minutes. So your IV here is time. Okay. So let's say what kind of problems are these? So for example, you want to see whether exposure to violent films influences mood. Okay, so influences mood. Okay, so what you can do when you're measuring mood is you maybe ask people to give a self rating on whether their mood is very pleasant, unpleasant, or very unpleasant. And then you want to see how long does it take for a violent movie to influence the mood of a person. So, how are you supposed to study that? So, you can sample your participants and then divide them, classify them into four groups. And each of the groups, except for one, right? So, level 2, level 3, level 4, they will all watch violent videos, but in different lengths. Okay, so some will watch a 5-minute video, the others will watch a 10-minute and 15-minute video. And then you are going to see if it influences the mood that they have. Okay, so that is manipulation. Now, what are the things you can manipulate in a study? You can manipulate through treatments. So you can provide treatment or deprive people of treatment. You can also give multiple treatments, a combination of different treatments, or just one treatment. Okay, so for example, depression. So let's say you want to try and see if uh, giving dogs to patients with depression, does it improve their condition? So it's an either or situation. They either get dogs to help them, or they don't get dogs at all. Or sometimes you can maybe combine that with something else. So you give them dogs and then you also give them fish, versus purely dogs versus no animals at all, right? So that's one. You can also manipulate environmental conditions. So a very simple example would be you can ask students to stay inside a room. So in some cases, the room is well lighted. In some cases, the room is pretty dim. In another case, maybe the room temperature is a bit hot or warm. In some cases, you can turn the AC on full and see how it influences a dependent variable. There are also conditions where you could manipulate people by giving rewards and punishment. So maybe you want to see for grade schoolers if giving a certain kind of reward or giving a certain kind of punishment would influence their performance on a test, right? Or maybe you can explore something such as thoughts, beliefs, self esteem, which, if you think about it, may sound like variables that cannot be manipulated. But if you really design your manipulation well, you can influence them. One popular example would be self esteem. So there are research studies where people in a control group are asked to take uh, an exam, and then people in an experimental group are also asked to take the same exam. But in the experimental group, there will be, of course, a form of manipulation. When the results are shown, they will be told that they scored very low in the exam, regardless of their actual score. Okay, so there's deception there. But that's also the manipulation. And then the dependent variable would be something like the performance in another activity. So in that kind of study, we're trying to manipulate the self-esteem of the person, making the person believe that he's not very good at something, in order to see whether that will influence his future performance in another activity. Okay? So take note that when we're talking about manipulation, we have to be able to distinguish an experimental variable versus an individual differences variable. So an experimental variable is, okay, includes the first part. All right? So treatment provided, environmental conditions, rewards, punishments, participants' thoughts, beliefs, self esteem, etc. Whereas an individual differences variable is something that we cannot manipulate. A very simple example of this would be biological sex, right? So we can't manipulate that for sure. So if you have a participant, your participant is female, you definitely cannot ask the participant to change his or her biological sex for the sake of your study, right? So yeah, so we have to be very sensitive of that. So that is an example of an individual differences variable. Now, there are some instances where we assume that our manipulation worked when in fact it didn't. Okay, so for example, let's say we want to know how many chocolate bars to give a child, okay, to motivate him or her, okay, to answer a test that we are about to give. So in level 1, we give 0 chocolate bars. In level 2, we give 3 chocolate bars. Okay. Okay. So 3 chocolate bars. And in level 3, we give 5 chocolate bars. I don't know about you, but for sure I will be motivated to study more if I get 5 chocolate bars. But anyway, so let's say those are your levels. You hope to see whether those chocolate bars will motivate a kid to perform better in a quiz. But then, after you get your results, one of the moms of the kids tells you, well, my kid actually does not like chocolate bars. Okay? My kid doesn't like chocolates in general. So that means the chocolates did not serve as a reward for that child. And so, whatever the performance of that child was in the quiz, that was most likely because of something else and not because the kid found your chocolate bars rewarding, nor was it because the chocolate bars were appealing. That, dear students, is what we call a failure of manipulation. And so sometimes what we need to do when we're doing a study is to conduct a manipulation. Sorry if I'm writing it down here. Is what we call a manipulation check. So in a manipulation check, we're trying to see if we are actually properly manipulating the variable that we're studying. So in this case, is the chocolate bar really serving as a reward? Does the child enjoy having the chocolate bars?